Recording in progress.
Oh, wow. Okay. So this week's Torah portion, we started a couple of weeks ago with the beginning of the Torah, creation of the world, Adam and Eve. Yesterday, synagogues around the world read about Noah and the flood. And this week we transition into Abraham and Sarah. We've already been introduced to them at the end of last week's Torah portion. At this stage, they're already, actually, by today's standards, on in years, 75 and 70. They're older, we're going to focus on one part here. Is that God says several times that He's going to give the land of Israel. Doesn't call it Israel; it's Canaan there, to Abraham, Sarah, and their descendants. And we're going to talk today about we're hooking on to the idea of how God frames the gift or the bestowal of the land to the Jewish people. But we're going to try to use that as a springboard to understand not only about our relationship with the land, but about relationships in general, relationship with God and relationships in general. So let's start on text 1a, and I will share the screen. Okay. Morning, Arthur.
Good morning.
Just about to start. So we're on page 41. So as I mentioned, that God told Abraham, says that I'm going to give this land to you, to your children. I want to contrast two verses in the Torah portion. In text 1a, says God appeared to Abram. At that point, he's not called Abraham yet. We'll get to that in future weeks. And he's here, Avram, not Abraham, or Abram, not Abraham. And it said, I will give this land to your children. Let's say I'm going to give it to you. It says, I'm going to give it to your children. And it says, I'm going to give it. So somewhat innocuous. Text 1b, the language is a little different. God told him, I am God who took you out from Ur Kasdim. Ur Kasdim is in Iraq. That's also, he references the past. But here is something else, is to grant you this land, not to your children, to you. And now, and this is the operative part, as an inheritance. The first one is, I will give you. It's a gift. The other one is as an inheritance. Now, in our thinking, inheritance is kind of a gift. You write a will, you're giving gifts. But in Torah thought they're not the same. The legalities of a gift and the legalities of inheritance are quite different. And the Torah's nuances in verbiage make a difference. So once it is being referred to as a gift, so to speak. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, I should have gone down more. This is text to be. God took from Ur Kasdim to grant you his land as an inheritance. So there's gift and inheritance. So one of the greats of the early 1900s and before that, it says in text 2, points out. So why is it there's these two different languages? This Talmudic genius known as the Rogatchover, he says God had previously promised to give Israel to Abraham as a gift. However, the second promise refers to the second conquering of Israel, which is an inheritance. Okay, so the Jews come out of Egypt. They're 40 years in the desert. The goal is they're going to go to Israel. They're going to get Israel. Moses dies in the desert. And his disciple, Joshua, who is the leader of the Jewish people, he leads the Jews into Canaan, and he leads the conquest of Canaan, of Israel. That is roughly the year 1273 before the Common Era. The Jews settle. There's King David. There's King Solomon. There's a there's not only one Jewish kingdom there, there's two Jewish kingdoms because they don't get along. So there's for hundreds of years, there is this Jewish kingdom. The Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar comes, attacks the Israel, and the Jews are carted off. So there are virtually no Jews in the land for a while, like up until around the time of the Purim story. So the Jews are in Babylonia or anywhere else are dead. And then after the Purim story, which is around 350 before the Common Era, they come back to Israel. So there are two episodes of the Jews taking possession of Israel. One is with Joshua, and one is, we'll say, the time of there's a biblical figure, Ezra, Nehemiah. I don't know if you're familiar with that. There was this the king of Babylonia, Cyrus began it. Darius or Darius allowed the rebuilding of the temple, allowed the Jews to go back from it was the Persian Empire at that time, and the Jews came back to Israel. They were beaten. It wasn't that many, but they came back to take possession of the land. So what this Rabbi Rosen is saying is that those two times that we just quoted, where God tells Abraham in this week's Torah portion, long before there's a Joshua and long before there's a King Cyrus or an Ezra, frames two different verses to frame two different actions, two different experiences of taking possession of the land. One was when Joshua and the people conquered the land, and the second time is when they came back in to take possession of the land. And those two were not identical in Jewish legal terms. And that's why one is framed as a gift and the other one is framed as an inheritance. Now, aside from the legalities, what was the difference between the first time going in and the second time going in? The first time going into when Joshua came, they just come out of Egypt. They've come 40 years before. They're sitting in the desert. God's been taking care of them in the desert, and now they're coming in to conquer the land. It wasn't easy, but they came in to conquer the land. The staging for the second one was a much more difficult time. The Jews went through their equivalent of a Holocaust. We don't know how many hundreds of thousands or millions were killed by hand, slaughtered by the Babylonians. The rest taken off into bondage. Israel is desolate, and when they come back, it's 20,000, whatever. It's a small number. They're stragglers. They build. They had a magnificent temple the first time. This one started off with plywood. They were. It's not an easy situation.
Kind of like here.
Yes, right. We still have the plywood outside. Actually, just a memory. Good point. Yeah, we didn't have the tzara stuff. Just regular stress. Text 3, it says, Rashi brings up that that in this week's Torah portion, right in that episode of God telling Abraham that he's going to give it to them as an inheritance. In other words, text 1b, he has a vision. And it's there, it says there's darkness, and Abraham has a vision. It's called the covenant between the parts. I wish they'd brought more of it, but he sees fire and darkness. And Rashi says that is a symbol to him of the darkness of the exile, of the tzaras that his children would go through. But it's by the second time.
Okay, let's go back to 1.
Sure.
Okay, it occurs to me that if you give it as a gift to the family, and if you give it as an inheritance to the family, either way, it should be passed down through the generations.
You would think. Great question. We're gonna thankfully we're gonna tackle that a little right now. Text 4. Text 4 is from the Talmud. here's the idea. And I don't want to get into the laws of inheritance right now, but I think it's important to understand because it is essential to this idea. Inheritance, a gift has certain laws. There's understanding a gift, maybe I give a gift predicated on certain understandings of what there's maybe some quid pro quo, and once I give it to you, it's yours. But I can give it to you with conditions. So I can give this to Valerie and say that afterwards I don't want it to go forward in Valerie's estate. I want it to go to Ganav. And that's the condition of the gift. And you accept the gift, you accept the conditions. It's very doable.
In other words, the inheritance is unconditional.
Correct. Because inheritance is not a gift. Inheritance is, in Torah thinking, and they bring it here later, the word for inheritance, nachla, means it's the same word as a river. It's a flow of generations. So when one generation moves on, the second generation automatically steps in. You don't have to write a will in Torah law. But if you don't write a will, it's going to go to the people, the heirs as defined by the Torah. In today's Torah life, if someone wants to create a will and allocate assets to people not within the direct line the Torah does, it's actually framed as a gift that takes effect 1 minute before they die. It's a gift. Otherwise, it's not theirs to give. It already passed on to the next generation. So it's not it's considered a transition of a natural transition of one generation to the next. No one has to give anything. No one has to ask for anything. No one has to agree to take anything. It goes from person to person, or from generation to generation.
So all the children of Abraham have rights to the land of Canaan.
It's actually, you'll see later, it's God gives it to Abraham and Sarah and to their children.
Gotcha.
We thought of that.
Right. And the final question: is the land of Canaan somewhere in Torah or not defined?
Yeah.
The whole of Israel, all West Bank, part of Jordan, part of Syria.
And Gaza is part of it.
Obviously.
No. Some of it, Eilat is not.
Sinai Peninsula.
Eilat is not.
No, Eilat is not.
No.
We're
not giving it away.
How about Sinai Peninsula?
The Sinai, I believe, is. There's actually, the book of Joshua has very, very
well-defined map.
Oh, that definitely.
Got it.
Okay. So in text 4 from the Talmud, it says, if one stipulates, my inheritance goes to you, and after your passing, it will transfer to somebody else, which you could do with a gift. If the first recipient is a legitimate heir, the second party receives nothing. You have no right to give away my stuff. If naturally it goes to me, then it's mine. You want to give it as a gift, you can give it as a gift now. But you can't stipulate that my rightfully owned belongings should go to someone else. If you gave it to me as a gift, and you can stipulate whatever you want. This is not seen as a gift. This is seen as natural progression. So it's a very important thing when it comes to estate planning. If we leave it to the Torah devices, it has a certain framework. Otherwise, we give it all. And a lot of wills today are all framed as all gifts, allocating. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just then it's the way it works. But again, left to nature and how the Torah guides, once a person gets it, you don't give it to me. I stepped into your shoes. And if you give it to me, you get to stipulate. You don't get it once. If it's mine, it was always partially mine. There was always at least a potential that that's going to be going to come to me. And when the one generation moves on, you step into their shoes. So, and the Talmud specifies very clearly, this is not a gift. It is an inheritance, and inheritance has no end. That's everybody's free to make their will as gifts, but if it's as an inheritance, it's a different ball of wax. Okay. So now, Maimonides. Well, let's bring this back to taking possession of Israel. We said, just to frame this again, we said that there were two different episodes of the Jews taking possession of Israel. One was Joshua, well, the other one, let's call it Ezra. We said that the rabbis say that the two different times that we find with how it's described in the giving of the land, once as a gift, once as an inheritance, are really for two different things. It was a gift given as a gift to the Jews in the time of Joshua, as an inheritance the second time through the Ezra. Now, so let's drill down a little bit about the land. Text 5. All the lands that Jews came to possess when they ascended to Israel from Egypt became sacred. This was Israel's first sanctification. So the Jews come to the land. They take the land. God gave them the land. And what does it mean become sacred? We call it the Holy Land. It's a holy land because God gave it to us, but there's actually legal ramifications. There are laws in Torah. For example, if I have a garden outside and I grow some tomatoes, If I want, I can give some to charity. If I don't, make one, I can make a salad, whatever I want. It's all mine. In Torah law, in Israel, you have to give some of that. There's tithes that are a biblical commandment. A lot of agricultural laws that way. That's only in the Holy Land. Outside of Israel, some of them we do rabbinically, traditionally, but there are laws that are specifically for Israel, and practiced till today in Israel. It's a big deal being there. Shemitah, have you ever heard every seventh year? We just finished it. It's a really big deal. It's a big hassle. A lot of the time in being in Israel during the Shemitah year, eating. So when the Jews took possession, they ascended to Egypt, it became sacred. And legally, this was Israel's first sanctification of the land. Right? Now Maimonides goes further. He says, when they were exiled from Israel, the sanctity of the land expired. God gave this to the Jews. But like I say, it was a gift. You lost the gift. It's not yours. It's not yours. It's not holy anymore. So a Jew going and planting tomatoes, if those are Jews who were left, after Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the place and took most of either killed them or took them off to Babylonia, did not have to give tithes. Israel lost its sacred status for that period of time.
This sounds like a pill pull.
A pill pull? It's a thesis. It's Jewish law. That's why Maimonides, it can't get better. Therefore, the consecration was only effective for the duration of the conquest, not for all time. It was not a permanent sanctification of the land. It was when the Jews had possession of it, then it has that status. The Jews don't have possession of it. They're not here. They were taken off to Babylonia. It seems to be at some level no man's land, even though it was given to the Jews way back. But here there was something. For the sake of the consecration, it's no longer effective. By contrast, Maimonides writes, and he writes this in the laws of Truma. Truma is the tithe of those agrarian laws. By contrast, when the exiled Jews returned and took possession of portions of the land, they consecrated it anew. This consecration was forever, for that time, for all time. But Jewish law, after the Romans destroyed Israel, Jews still had the mitzvah, the mitzvahs of Israel in the land of Israel. Even though now they're taking off slaves to Rome, and so many are dead, and so on, and they're also back in Babylonia. That consecration was not a gift; it was like an inheritance. It's yours, and it stays with you forever. So this is the legal framing. Again, we're going to be getting into something more psycho-spiritual, but the legal framing is such, and this is throughout Jewish law, again, Talmud and Talmudic authorities, there was a difference in how, in the sanctity, the level of sanctity of the land, and the durability of the sanctity of the land, when Joshua took it over, or when Ezra took it over. Joshua had the law as of a gift, like we have in this week's Torah portion, and therefore it's not necessarily for perpetuity. The inheritance has that idea of being perpetually ours. And if you look in text 6, that's one of the reasons we say in our prayers today on holidays, we have this language, because of our sins we were exiled from our land. If we're exiled, it's not our land. I mean, we said this 100 years ago. My great-grandparents said this. My great-grandparents were somewhere in Poland. They had the Turks controlled Israel. It wasn't our land. Still called our land. Not just because nostalgically, because it was our land. We consider that it always our land. From that time on, it was given as as I say, the idea of inheritance. And inheritance, the idea is that it passes. It doesn't really depend on the bequeather or the heir if they want it. If they haven't intervened in the middle to give it away as a gift, it just comes. Now, having spoken about the legal end, now we want to get into something that's a little bit closer to home. The idea of why would it be that specifically when in the time of the Second Temple, let's break it down to First Temple, Second Temple. Second Temple, when Ezra came back, and then we said that it brought the Jews back, and it was a difficult time, and the Jews were struggling. The Jews were struggling financially. The Jews were struggling spiritually. And it was a difficult period of time also. The Second Temple was not an easy period of time. The leadership was much more corrupt. There were a lot of problems that went on amongst the Jewish people in the Second Temple that didn't happen in the First Temple. The First Temple, Solomon's time, is like our heyday. Second Temple had a lot of problems. I'm sorry? Click. I didn't go yet. Did I do it? I'm not up to it yet. But I'm going to do it now. Thank you, though. 7a. This is from the founder of Chabad. He writes, "It is well known from the Talmud that most of the rabbinic decrees, stringencies, and precautionary restrictions were imposed during the Second Temple era. This is because the Jewish people were not completely free from the influence of their previous exile during this era. They remained under the rule of foreign kings, as is well known. The restricted rabbinic enactments were designed to guard against these unholy influences. This was not the case during the First Temple era. At that time, the other side had no control or governance. Other side, meaning the unholiness, had no control or governance over the Jews." Okay, so here's another historical fact that helps us understand this. One thing that happened with the destruction of the Babylonians, again, this is the period of time of the Purim story. So just for a historical fun fact, Babylonia was like the United States of its time. That's where the Jews flourished. The Jews came there as captives, and soon the inmates are running the asylum. The Jews are doing very well in Babylonia. To the extent that we had, a Jewish queen, Queen Esther eventually gets to the top there, and her uncle or cousin, Mordechai, who is a leading rabbi, he's a minister of the government. So the Jews did very well in Babylon. But now, once they got a legal permission, Babylonia is Babylonia. It's time to go back to Israel. So what this rabbinic leader named Ezra did is he got together. There used to be a court of 71 sages, which was known as the Sanhedrin. And that was really where the final say on Torah and tradition. It was very important. They served a crucial role in Judaism to make sure that there was no splits. That all disputes were settled. There was no Sephardi, Ashkenazi, all that. There was Jewish tradition. It was very seamless.
How is it that the consecration, while Israel was under the governance of a foreign power, how is it that is more holy than the first consecration?
That's a good question. So here, it wasn't under the governance of a foreign power necessarily, because the Babylonians allowed them to have governance, but the setting was not as great as it was in Joshua, and that's what we're going to talk about. So the Jews, when they came back into Babylonia, and it's not so relevant here, but I think it's relevant for us to understand, Ezra gathered all the weighty rabbinic opinions. He said, I want to have everybody around the table. It was more than 71. Turned out to be 120 sages. And he called this convocation the Great Knesset, the Great Assembly, which is why there are 120 seats in the Knesset in Israel, because it's meant to mirror the Knesset, what's called Anshe Knesset Hagdola, the men of the Great Assembly. He said, we're in shambles. Jews are scattered. We've had no central authority. I want you to structure Judaism for the road ahead. They're the ones who created a prayer book. There was no formalized prayer book. They were the ones who, we're not sure when synagogues started, but they started to formalize a lot of what we know as normative Judaism. Came about through this Anshe Knesset Sagdola, the Great Assembly. They gave a structure. They didn't leave it to us and our spiritual inspiration. They gave us guardrails. They gave a structure to Judaism. So a lot of their ordinances are not, you would think of they're just bread and butter Judaism. They actually started that time when we came back from Babylon. Okay, so here in 7a, what we're saying is that during that time, that's when the rabbinic decrees, most of the rabbinic decrees, stringencies, precautionary restrictions, that's were imposed during the Second Temple era. It's not only Second Temple era; it means during the time of this Great Assembly, because they ruled as we were beginning the Second Temple era and for a while forward. We're not sure how long. If text 7b, also from the founder of Chabad, during the First Temple era, there was no daily prayer. However, the more we declined spiritually, the more prayer we require, because the searing passion of prayer removes our inner dross and attaches us to God. Therefore, during the First Temple era, when there was scant spiritual decline, Jews did not require passionate prayer. The sacrificial rites sufficed to remove what little dross they had and to attach them to God. The Jews we had in the First Temple era, we were Jews and we were connected to God. We had much less ritual. There was ritual going on in the temple, but that wasn't, on a regular Sunday, we'd be sitting here, we're not in the temple. But it was enough for us to be able to have an enthusiastic connection with God. During the Second Temple era, sure.
What is dross?
Dross is an English word which means like schmutz. You know what schmutz is? Yeah, okay. It's impurities. During the Second Temple era, our sages began to introduce daily prayers. At that time, the prayers were relatively short, in proportion to the degree of flaming passion required to remove their increased dross. Schmutz. In our day, we progressively increase our prayers and passion. In each generation, we pray with more passion. We have to try and increase that because we've got to. We're working harder to stay afloat. This is not because we are more pious than our predecessors. On the contrary, it is because each generation is increasingly infiltrated by spiritual, what they call dross. Thus, we require a more powerful flame of prayer to cleanse ourselves spiritually. So the idea that we find Talmudically and spiritually is that with this generation, because of our challenges, because things were difficult, because it wasn't with the security and safety of Solomon's times, because it wasn't with the strong spiritual connection of Solomon's time, we need to give more, first of all, safeguards, guardrails to make sure that we're on the right path, and also more opportunities to increase enthusiasm, because you can't expect enthusiasm is going to happen on its own. So the second temple was a time of more challenge, but at a time, therefore, there was a lot more attention to pay to it to try to overcome the challenge. This, some authorities will say you can compare this, the first temple era, second temple era, to the difference between someone who is innately has an innately good moral compass, raised well, and their passions are on doing good things, and their socialization and their habits are in good things. We're going to call that what we'll call that tzaddik. Person who's they're good. The other one is all of us. We struggle. Now, so even look in our lives, you want to think of it this way. There are some things, hopefully, we don't struggle for. Hopefully, we don't struggle with the appetite for pedophilia. See, it's not on the radar. Say, oh, I wasn't a pedophile today. I got to deserve a gold star before it. No, I never thought of it. I never really wanted to murder somebody. There are things that just it's not part of what we do. Talking gossip, yeah, we talk about something that's attractive. There are other things that are attractive. So within our own lives, we see there's some things which come smoothly, and some things we have to struggle for. Well, there are some people who are in general in that smooth state. Maybe they've made themselves into a smooth state where they really don't even struggle. They don't struggle against gossip. They don't struggle against doing the wrong things because they've purified themselves. Those are rare people. But that's the righteous. They have a smoother sailing. Most of us were born to struggle. So if you look at text, the first temple was a time more smooth sailing. The second temple was a time of struggle. So if you look at 8a from Maimonides, he writes that pious people, he means, in other words, these people who are really, they're so connected and so zoned into the right behaviors, they follow their passions and inclinations. But they're good because they're good. They behave meritoriously because it's what they want and yearn to do. Someone wakes up in the morning and says, I just want to go help out of a soup kitchen. And I want to pray. And I want to do mitzvahs. That's beautiful. That's their yearning. Other people will say, no, this is what I want for myself. Say, you know something, but I'm going to take some time for myself. I'm going to go study or I'm going to pray. I'm going to go spend time in the soup kitchen because they're overcoming it. But there are some people where that's their passion. The philosophers have agreed that the pious are more distinguished and complete than those who struggle to control themselves. So you could, at one level, you say, that's beautiful. They lead a much more holistically holy life because there's nothing in them pulling them somewhere else.
However,
yes,
the ones who are struggling to control themselves, I don't know, I would consider them more valuable because they know what's right and they're trying to achieve it.
Bingo. Hang on. Don't go anywhere. Next, 8b. Is another chalk one up for the righteous people. Righteous people are in a constant state of unity and attachment to godliness. They are detached from all forms of tactile pleasure and they're certainly distant from evil and the like. They're not swept up in wanting a Ferrari and a steak. They're looking for substance and meaning. In their worship, they're continually aware of the divine's light. They feel it in their souls and are moved by his immanence. So we're building them up, the righteous people. A tzaddik, a righteous person, is amazing. But as just reminded us, in 8c, we'll find from Maimonides, penitents should not consider themselves lower than the righteous on account of their sins and transgressions. This isn't true. They are beloved and desirable before the Creator as if they had never sinned, if they've repented. Furthermore, they will be greatly rewarded if they have tasted sin and yet separated from it, conquering their urges. Our sages declared, Where the penitent stands, even the completely righteous cannot stand. The penitent transcends those who never sin, for they overcome their evil inclination. So I grew up observant, so I do what I do. I never had to fight with myself to wear a yarmulke or to keep Shabbos. So this is just this is the way I'm trained. There are things that I have to struggle with, but from my entire life, because I've been hanging around such people, it's awesome to see someone who has had the courage to really make change in their lives. There's a guy, I don't know if you know, that he runs a Chabad store in Orange named Baruch Clark. So I know Baruch since I'm 3, I think. So, but since I can remembering, but Baruch is a Chabad rabbi. He looks like me, but he's not really a Chabad. He's not. Technically, he doesn't have. He's a Chabad rabbi, but he comes from a very different background than I do. And I remember seeing a picture of him with a raised black glove fist with Caesar Chavez during the grape workers' revolt. And I remember as a kid, I saw a picture of him. He certainly didn't look like a rabbi in that picture, and he told me it was him. And he told me about his prior life. And I remember feeling it was amazing that he made that switch where, and his connection with his Judaism was a love affair, where for me it was this is what my parents taught me. I don't know, I was a kid, but it was something where the passion that he had with his Judaism was something that was, and still is, was always not only him, but people like that. It's really awesome to me because I tend to take things for granted because I was raised in it. So if you look at text 8d, also from Maimonides, when we examined the words of our sages on this matter, we found that those who feel the allure of sin are more distinguished and complete than those who don't desire it. Why? Because they're accomplishing something. They're working. They're battling. This is true to the extent that they said that the reward of those who control their urges is commensurate with the degree of their struggle. And they said, in accordance with the effort is the reward. Think about it this way. Someone who has a natural proficiency for math and someone who doesn't in 9th grade. And one kid gets 100 without doing homework. The other one struggles and gets a 95. I would say 100 is 100, 95 is 95, but as far as accomplishment and beauty, the one who got the 95, they deserve, they worked for it. Other kids, smart kids tend to sail through because they don't have to work so hard to get good grades.
So the God gave one bigger sechel than the other.
Of course. That mean a better IQ, higher IQ, or a greater mathematical facility? For sure. I mean, we're born that. You don't think someone that is born?
So why Hashem distinguish between the two children?
Because we're born to be different, and each one has their own challenges. And we have our own blessings, and sometimes the blessing is also a challenge, because if for a kid who has a facility or something good, it's a challenge to get them to actually work hard, because why should I don't have to.
So what is the lesson to both of the children from Hashem?
The lessons of both of the children of Hashem is, look at your blessings, don't take them for granted, and if you can get 100 easily, work to get 110, or spend some time and learn something new too. What comes easy is not what God created us to accomplish. Text 9. Another thing about this second type, we'll call it a penitent, the unbreakable bond. This is from the Rebbe. If your Jewish lifestyle is this detached from worldly engagement, if you were never tested by quote unquote the other side, there's no certainty that you would pass a test should you ever be tested. I never had to struggle with drugs in my high school. Didn't exist. I never had to struggle with premarital sex things. It just didn't, it wasn't part of my life. I don't know how I would have fared if I had the challenges that my peers did in a different setting. I only know what I know. And I certainly had less challenges. Thank God. But on the other hand, there's something to be said for being tested and passing. Penitents are different. They start at the bottom and work their way to the top. Therefore, even their worst character traits become conducive to holiness. The manifestation of godliness in their lives is enduring. It is never interrupted. These are people changing themselves. They are self-made people. Not saying this is the way I was born. This is the family I was born in. This is the way I was raised, and that this is the way it is. No, I want to be better, and that could be with someone who wasn't raised with enough love as a child. Say, listen, this is just me. Or you read books and see where there's a deficiency and say, I want to do better for my kids. Penitents already tangled with the allure of worldliness. Moreover, they even stumbled, God forbid, and dabbled in behaviors that transgress God's will. Despite all of this, they returned to God, His Torah and His commandments. This demonstrates that the ethos of Torah and mitzvahs permeate them to the extent that they cannot ever be separated again from God. Their bond with God is constant, is without boundaries. So this is, if you think about like a reformed smoker or someone, when someone has tasted it and they come back, they're going to be very. I'm not going to talk about alcoholism because they see it more as it's more of a medical thing, but emotionally, when someone has had a problem with something, when they've in Chassidic life, you say when a rope is broken, and you want to continue to use the rope, that spot where it was ripped you need a double knot. You have to make it extra sturdy. Where we know we have fallen, if we recognize it, if we acknowledge it, and we want to do better, that's a place we really have to think twice about. And bear it in mind. Say, this is something I screwed up on that last week or last year. I have another opportunity to come in there. I'm not going to be distracted by the things going on because the mindfulness is going to let me keep me out where I need to be. That could be in any relationship. Something messed up. We want to try to redouble our efforts that it doesn't mess up. Text 10a. Penitents are completely subsumed within God. This is because they fell and became entangled in a state of ego, darkness, and evil. If they nullified their ego and returned from the dark to see God with all their hearts, in complete penitence, they achieve complete transformation. So we're making a big deal here, and because remember, we're looking at First Temple era as being more seamless. That's reminiscent of the saintly, the tzaddik, the righteous person, and that's when the Jews got the land as gift. Second Temple era, when we are really not in good shape, and we have to really struggle for everything we achieve, that's where it's inheritance. And so now we're focusing on the beauty of the struggle. So this text 10b is from a guy named Jay Litvin. I actually never met Jay Litvin, but I've known about him much of my life. He passed away, wow, it's already almost 20 years. He's someone who became observant later in life. He led Chabad Children of Chernobyl. He's also I think he was a media guy originally, and he was he was a great writer, in my opinion, fantastic writer. So this is a piece that they're bringing from Jay Litvin. It's from an article he called Vistas. You stand in this moment. Many such moments lay behind you. Many more, God willing, before you. In each of these moments, there is, there was, and there always will be a choice. At a certain point, you have lived long enough to have made many choices and to be able to see the consequences they have wrought. From this vantage point, elevated by maturity, you now see that every choice you made was made in ignorance. in hindsight. You recognize that the full impact of each choice was not seen at the time, and had it been, then perhaps another choice would have been made. I'm sure all of us who are, none of us are, in our 20s here. You look back at some life choices and say, if I had known then what I know now, I would have acted differently. I certainly feel that way. The remorse this awareness brings drives you to seek forgiveness, not for your sins, but for the actions you were so sure at the time you were right. We're right. Only now, when you have lived long enough to see their consequences, did you see how very foolhardy you have been. Each was flawed and limited, and in its wake created consequences you could not foresee, because if you had foreseen them, you probably wouldn't have done it. Then even though your mistakes and limitations could be excused by lack of knowledge, you still desire to stand before the heavenly court and ask forgiveness for these consequences, as unintentional as they may have been, are now very real and exist with a life of their own. I can't just wish them away. After you've lived enough years, you know that the future is as soon as yesterday, and that 10 or 20 years from now exists today. You know that just as you are asking forgiveness today for the consequences of actions taken 10 or 20 years ago, so too, 10 or 20 years from now, you'll be standing asking forgiveness for the actions you took today. Page 54. And now, knowing this, you arrive at the decision that stands before you today. You stand in fear and trepidation. You know that today's choice will create a future reality that you cannot possibly know. You're about to release an arrow from the bow, and you're already responsible for whatever target it hits, whether you aimed at it or not. Yet miraculously, you act. You release the arrow, you laugh, you sing, you dance, because ultimately, through your years, you have learned that God loves you. Your joy is precisely because there is a heavenly court before which you can stand and receive forgiveness and understanding and love. You laugh precisely because you know that behind the imperative of doing the very best you can is the futility of doing anything more than you can. You breathe deeply and release a smile because you know that God wants no more from you than you're able to do, and has already given you everything you need with which to do it. You dance because this is your freedom to dance your part in God's creation with grace and courage and faith. I think he's a great writer. And you sing knowing that you are only one voice in the chorus, and that the symphony is endless, ultimately perfect, yet paradoxically dependent on you. And finally, you realize that the failings, limitations, errors, and miscalculations, even the consequences that cause the blood to rush to your face in shame, are also part of your limited perspective, your narrow vision, your lowly vista. For if you could climb high enough, you would see that the reason the heavenly court grants its forgiveness is that ultimately there's really nothing to forgive. From the highest plateau, you would see that you are dancing your part perfectly. You always have and you always will. We are who God created us to be. Look. Yeah. Yeah. Oops. Okay. I'm sorry, I missed that last part. Okay. You heard me read it anyway. Okay. Now we're going to go to 11a. Let's go back to the idea of the land. Say that, going back to that Rabbi, the Rogachev, Rabbi Rosen, who spoke about how this is the second time when God uses the term inheritance by Abraham to Abraham. He's talking about the second entry into the land with Ezra. It says the heir becomes the testator, as it were. It is therefore the position of Jewish law that inheritance does not constitute transference of ownership. It's legally not a transference of ownership. An heir is an extension of the person. They take over the ownership, but it's the same ownership. It's not from one domain to another. And take a look at 11b on 56. Also a matter of laws. There was a rabbi who wrote a book on laws of inheritance. A gift is defined as a transfer of property that is not compelled by law. Another way to put it, the recipient has no inherent right to the property. The property is acquired solely by the largesse of the bestower. This is the universal meaning of the term gift. The recipient's right flows from the gift. Prior to the gift, the recipient had no right or claim to the property. This is clear as day. Now we come to estate and inheritance. This term relates to transfer of one's property to another upon one's passing. As it transfers to the heir, the estate flows from above to below. Before the passing, the heir has a vague encumbrance on the property. After the passing, the heir has an inherent right to the property. In other words, the property flows downstream. This is perhaps why the Torah uses the word nachla, a cognate of nachal, stream, to describe an estate. Estates are like rivers whose flow into the ocean cannot be blocked. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't give gifts to our estate. We can give gifts when we're alive, and we can give gifts for one moment before we pass away. But there is something, it's different. There, like the rabbis say that what if a person says, I don't want to give anything to my kids. I want to give it all away. Rabbis say that's not good. Got to give something. Something should pass. Because that's the natural order of things. Is one in violation of the Torah? No, it's not in violation of Torah. The Torah is, but the rabbis are giving advice. It's not wise. It's not healthy. Now, what if a person is Bill Gates and say, I could do so much good with this money and I only want to give my kids X amount? Go right ahead. That's perfect. There's no problem at all. I know people who do that. Say, I'm going to give them enough to be secure and they can now use it to make more money and I'm going to give it the rest of the way. Beautiful. One's a gift, one's an inheritance. They're two different animals. So here, why does he bring this? That therefore, what the Torah is saying, therefore, when Abraham, God tells Abraham, I'm going to give you Israel, so it's going to be two different ways. One is going to be as a gift. Another one, it's something that it's because I love you, I give a gift. But it's not going to have the permanence because we don't, it didn't really earn it. Second temple, when the relationship between us is one that you will earn because of the struggle you go through in life, that's going to be inheritance. There, then it's one. Then nothing can get in between. If you look at the key points on 57. Get this out of the way. It's blocked. Righteous people are fortunate because all their urges are holy and they can therefore do precisely as they want. Penitents must always struggle against their urges. Number two, penitents are fortunate because they get to struggle for God every day. They're constantly working to serve God. Number three, the righteous have never been tested. Thus, we can know if they would prevail if tested. The penitent has been tested and prevailed. Thus, their bond is firmer or more enduring. Number five, the penitent is exclusively devoted to God in every aspect of life. No part of their lives is separated from God. Thus, they enjoy oneness with God. And finally, the same is true about relationships. A meaningful relationship. Calm, peaceful relationships are relaxing and enjoyable. But if there's tumult and tempest, tumultuous and tempestuous relationships can strengthen the couple's bond. Sometimes when there's a clash, we learn to overcome some of the rough edges, and it strengthens us on the other side. We're not looking for clash, but the idea of recognizing that itself it can be a mechanism, a springboard for growth in the relationship is part of this lesson. So I want to remind everyone, I'll schedule an email. I am my family are going to Poland, God willing, Monday evening. Coming back, I think next Sunday late at night, I believe, or early Monday morning. So we won't be able to get together for this class, but God willing, we'll meet the Sunday afterwards. I'll be in touch.
Have a safe trip, Rabbi.
Thank you. You will. Bye.